All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. We're going to get started with this month's office hours. Typically, it's just me talking through our office hours, but this month we have a great guest. We have Amir. She's our one of our product managers at Kovrr, and we're going to talk a lot about use cases today. I sometimes indirectly talk about use cases, but she has a great presentation that will dive deep into what people are doing with Kovrr with CRQ, how they're solving problems in their organizations, and then lastly, how they can do that better and really sort of engineer and architect what they're doing in their board reporting and other things in order to be able to solve for some of those use cases today. So, free flowing conversation. Feel free to drop some questions into the chat. We'll be happy to answer those as we go. Or has some great things planned for you. We're going to show a little bit of the platform, but we're going to have some slides that talk a lot about what you do with it. I think that's the really important part. Sometimes there's almost a misalignment in really focusing on can we calculate cyber risk, down in a quantitative kind of way. Shortcut here is yes, we can. But the really more fascinating thing is how you use that to solve real world problems in your organizations and bring together parts of the company to really better understand the cyber risk as business risk, and then what we can do to prepare for it. So with that, I will turn it over to Or. I'm going to chime in as we go with questions along the way, so you won't hear the last of me for a little while. But Or, please take it away.
Hi, Jeff. Pleasure to be here. I think, though, we have this option that I think is super excited for our audience, right? To get the training sessions with you. So just before we'll skip, guys, you are able to sign up on your schedules with a session with Jack, and of course, I'll be happy also to come and say hi. So this is some kind of a Kovrr's offer, and Jack, let's kick it off, if that's okay.
Yeah, perfect. Yes, I forgot about that.
Great.
Yeah, we're doing these one-on-one sessions with me and others. I worked with a company earlier this week on a slide to help them understand their materiality / risk appetite. Yeah, we're doing that. If you're interested, please feel free to reach out at the information available there. Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. So everyone, thank you very much for being here. What we'll do, as Jack mentioned, we'll do it a bit different. So we'll go back and forth between slides and presentation about CRQ in general, how we connect the dots about the methodology to what we show in the platform, and how we can utilize whatever is in the platform in order to meet our use cases, right, when utilizing CRQ. Apologies. And in general, we have for today 3 main use cases. The first one is, of course, the reporting and communication. So we'll talk about how the first thing they need to understand my risk or to do the exposure analysis, but from there to drill into maybe scenarios that I care about, performance over time, a quarterly update, how do I perform versus my peers, and all those great questions that you probably face in any kind of a meeting that you're having to say something about your cyber risk. Second, of course, is budgeting and justification of any kind, project, product, as an example, how we do it in the Kovrr world. And of course, the third is the transfer, the insurance policy optimization. Just here a note, we come from the insurance, also serving the insurance market. The model is calibrated by the insurance claims. So we have that specialty there also in mind. Jack, anything to add?
Yeah, I was just thinking, people come to CRQ for a lot of reasons. It's normally one of these type of things. If you're interested in CRQ but don't have a lot of experience, what use case is the one that really sort of stands out as here's how you sort of start? What's your entry level CRQ use case?
Oh, it's understand my risk. What do you think?
I think you're right. Yeah, I think people want to sort of say, I've been reporting this as we have 10 highs and 5 lows, a couple mediums in there, and then sort of just moving that. I think that reporting one really kind of is a great place to start, which is where we're going to go next. So why don't we kick into
that? Surprisingly. Yeah, cool. Okay. So Jack, you know it better than me and the audience as well. They enter a room, right? And they say something about if they use qualitative at the past also. So again, we say it's high, it's medium, it's low, but what does it mean? What kind of decisions I can make? How do I explain what can possibly go wrong next year, and how by that I can plan efficiently my budget or my insurance? So our offer is to start from the basics. Every time stuff gets hard, I always go back to basics, right? And what are the basics? Is to understand how we calculate cyber risk exposure quantification. So Kovrr's world, Monte Carlo simulation, we make the next year 10,000 times options. We average them all up and we get an average. And the average is easy to use because then we can break it down, we can sum it up. It's something easy. But it's not just the average, right? We have a variety of losses, and that's where the curve, the EP curve comes. And then now we'll look at it, and also to start to understand where the risk is coming from. So I have a number, but what's that number? What's behind it? And so what's the probability or the likelihood for me to have an event? It's a good start. What events are most likely to occur to me, and how do they unfold, or how big they can be? And in the Kovrr world, right, we have 3 different types or options to look at exposure, and we'll now go to the platform, and then we'll tie it back to scenarios even to say, okay, we can look at losses that comes from, you know it better than me, the board is scared about ransomware or data breaches or business interruption, or those that hits me and others, like the systemic, the not petty alike, or even the latest one, right, that we've just experienced. As just an example, CrowdStrike. Is that an issue? Damage types. Does my losses comes from a specific type of thing that I need to pay for a loss or a damage? Is it about the forensics that eats most of my money? It's the fact that I need to notify people because of data recovery, data breaches? Is that the extortion itself because I'm super targeted and I'm doing big industry that in the last couple of years, they ask most of the ransom from our audience or my peers? Or is it can be even bundled all together? So when I go and I start understanding my loss, this is what I want to do. I want to understand my risk. I can start looking at this. I can start understanding, and I know Jack has shown you that before, right? So Jack, please feel free to jump here. What is my likelihood to suffer an event next year in general? I have 27%. We'll talk about the peers later on. There's an aspect, you know, the famous curve that we like. There's a variety, a range of possibilities for damage next year. So on average, as we know, it's 37 million. My worst case is around the 430. But sometimes you get the hard questions. Listen, I only have, I don't know, $1 million to lose next year about incidents. I'm not willing for the company to suffer any kind of an incident more than $1 million. Jack, how much time you've spent having those conversations, right, with high-ranked people or even CISOs that says, okay, but I have that number that somebody gave. Is it even realistic? What does it mean? Can I live up to that? So we can look even to start understanding that risk right on the curve and to say, okay, if that's an example of your company, well, I have 88 chances that if an event will occur, it's going to have at least $1 million loss.
So a couple questions that I thought of. I'm sorry to interrupt you there. And I look at this and, you know, I think there's value in the curve itself, and the visualization is powerful. I think it shows you a distribution of losses over time, what you could expect. And we're talking about future things, so it's difficult sometimes to put a single number on it. But we do pull out a couple of numbers that way. So the average number and the worst case number, you think those are good planning numbers for certain types of use cases? Maybe talk about that a little bit. What do you use the average and that worst case number for?
I think the average serves the good understanding of the entire simulation and give the people the understanding of what happens in total or can potentially happens to me in general. The worst case is just the human nature. We do stuff because we are afraid of the worst case. We plan ahead because of those big worst case as human beings, right? So when I have that big number, it's not about scare tactics. It's just about to understand, okay, what was my gut feeling about that worst case? Where is my planning today to handle that use case of worst case? It's okay to acknowledge that I'm far, maybe I'm close. And I think it brings and it serves the option to have hard conversations, right? But with some kind of a baseline that we can all say, okay, it's a little bit higher, it's a little bit lower. What does it has behind that number? And not just to say, yeah, well, and those two metrics are the most useful one. We can, of course, add, for example, it's easy to say median because people understand 50% chance just in general, right? Like they flip a coin. So I like to use medians. That's another one that it's easy for people to understand. We can just explain that there is a difference between median and average and average. And then the rest becomes tricky. What is 80% chance to do something? What is 20% to I will keep it simple, use those three. And what do you think? There's anything else
I
that
think
you
that
would have
makes sense.
added?
I
Yeah,
always joke that nobody really keeps a cybersecurity team on the payroll because of that average loss. That's really to
exactly.
let's make sure this worst case thing never happens. And you're right. You can pick different benchmarks at 95 or 99%. I think that's what a lot of banks will do, because they have very specific capital holding
Exactly.
requirements. They have to account for those types of things.
Exactly.
But I think for a lot of people sort of making this transition from, I have, 12 highs, and, now I have, $37 million average loss. What do I do with that? I think these are really good starting points for that.
I think what's cool though about averages, even though nobody to a certain extent, like maybe uses specifically the average mathematically, it's also easy to break down, right? It's easier for people to understand how it looks in terms also of, let's say, a pie, how it's divided. And we can utilize that concept on all, maybe even other areas of the curves that might be looking a little bit different. But if, for example, we say, okay, I have 37 on the average, what's cool about it is that then we can start saying, okay, I want to understand those numbers. And I can start to understand that most of them comes from data breach or that comes from valid accounts, right? And if those are coming from data breach, what is the portion of the cake or the donut that comes with that? And also what also I can do about that? And what are those initial vectors? So this is a starting point. And what also they can start doing is to say, okay, what am I paying for? What, not just what causing me those 37 or the 400 mil, but what am I paying for? And now we can see, for example, to my company here on my environment, that most of the high, the tail, the worst case scenario losses, surprisingly or not, coming from the losses attached to data theft and privacy. So I understand that while on average, right, I have losses that can come from different aspects, events, initial vectors, costs, I can definitely see that around the big number that drives most of the loss is from data related losses. And now we can start planning, right? Now we can drill even deeper.
So I've
And
seen
this
these
is,
categories on the other slide, and if you could
yeah,
switch back to that, I got a question.
yeah, let's do this.
So I see event types, I see damage types, I see loss scenarios. And you'd mentioned CrowdStrike earlier, and I think this is a great example of this. Sometimes I and we will get questions around, oh, how soon will the CrowdStrike loss be in your data set for modeling that way? And I know how I answered that, but I'm curious your thoughts on that. How do you think about that? Is that a specific event that gets modeled, or is that a type of event? And how would you find CrowdStrike in these categories of loss here?
So let's think about CrowdStrike and what happened and how those covers world events. And I'm curious now to hear your answer. We didn't chat about it before. But
Okay.
let's talk about event types, right? There are those that we model three types of events. we model those, they're like somebody left its computer and lost, attritional, like out of the pocket money, as my boss calls it. Really, really small, but happens. The other side of it are the systemic ones, those that hurts me and hurts others. They're not intended specifically for one company or another. In most cases of them, there will be because of a self-propagating some kind of vulnerability, as an example, but also some kind of a service provider that went down, if that answers your question, Jack. And the targeted ones, right, those that are specifically me or because of me or looking at me. So if I need to think about the CrowdStrike one, it will be a systemic provider event that caused multiple incidents around different industries that are using maybe different sizes or not of businesses, right? Because it depends on the size of the business to justify having that on their on-prem. And now we can start thinking about, okay, so that happens. What happened to the companies? And that's the damage types. So what happened in that case? I couldn't work, so I lost income. I had to do recovery maybe, so I had business interruption recovery expenses. Maybe some at the beginning invested time to understand why it happened. So maybe there's forensics around, right? And maybe some PR was involved. I don't know, right? We can think about a few.
A lot of Uber Eats gift cards you got to spend.
Exactly, a lot of. So those are the damages that were triggered by type of that event, and then they are aggregated, as we said, about those loss scenarios that we've seen. So in this case, it will be a third party service provider failure that caused me a contingent business interruption, right? Together, maybe with others, depends on what did I utilize it for.
Yeah, I think you're right.
How did you think about that?
Yeah, I think it certainly is a novel trigger to this, right? It's a
Yeah,
very unique way that it happened. And when you're doing these modelings of events that have yet to happen, you have to think about them in terms of categories. And you did exactly what I would have expected is this an event where I'm leveraging a third party and it's failed in some way that caused my business to go down, and that's just what happened. Now that is a very anodyne way of thinking about it. It's not very exciting. The risk trigger, like how it actually played out, was very interesting, and everyone was excited about it.
Yeah.
But the loss looks the same, and I think that's why I and we say this oftentimes that we're confident in the results, because things that have happened are always examples of some sort of category of loss in this way. So we're covering that under business interruption. We have that already, and we model lots of different event types that cause that to happen that way. So I think it's interesting to see that play out. On the loss side, yeah, it may have a different loss magnitude that will cascade through the models over time, but based upon the core values that we use and then the projection algorithms, they get covered there either way. So I think that's how I would think about it too. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Agree. And now, if we did understand the fact how those numbers are being produced, then we have the annual average loss, and we have the tail, right? The extreme loss. And we know that losses can come from different types of events, and they start in different places, and they cause me different losses. I can start thinking also about my main drivers of risk and start communicating that to them. So as an example, right? What is the chances for me as a company to suffer a loss that comes from phishing? How many of us have heard that before? Hey, we have phishing here. So what we can understand about phishing is what is the average loss? What is the worst case scenario of events of phishing? What is my likelihood for me to suffer phishing? What can I do about mitigating it? And even what type of events like start from phishing, but they can cause me PI, ransomware, and data breach. So this is just one example. It can be initial vector in the Kovrr's language of phishing, But it can also be, as we just mentioned, right? Maybe type of loss, or maybe a type of event, right? I can have a ransomware event. Okay, ransomware event, a type of a very high level, we can call it scenario to this a certain extent. What is my chances for me to suffer ransomware next year? How much is it going to cost, right? Average and worst case, we love worst case. We're not trying to scare anyone. What is the average loss of a single event of ransomware? What is the duration that I can suffer? How many records if it's double extortion? How do they start it? So again, here we are allowing the evaluation, and I like it to call it internally drill down. Basically, we tell you, hey, this is the quantification. This is what has been modeled. Now drill even deep. Try to understand where the losses are coming from. Understand your risk. And you will be able to start communicating that risk in the different aspects of the model itself. Jack, any thoughts, comments?
Yeah, so can you go to that other slide with the drill downs, because we have a couple
This
questions
one?
in the chat. No, I think it was the demo screen there.
The demo. Yeah, let's do this.
Yeah,
Please.
and these top recommended actions. So one of the
I'll go.
questions are, how do you restore peace of mind after a loss event, and how do you establish a more resilient environment? I think I'll talk about the first one, and I'll let you handle the second one. So, establishing and restoring peace of mind after a loss event. I think you begin before the loss event by saying, here's all the bad things that can happen, and here's what I would recommend. And this is a thing that happens a lot, where you sort of ask CISOs and CROs these sort of theoretical question around, how do you make sure you can sleep at night? And I think that's sort of the answer. Not necessarily that I've done all the things I should do, but that I've communicated all the bad things that can happen and all the recommendations, and then I let people who take risk professionally, aka the people that work in the lines of business, they have made a choice, they signed off on it, and there we go. And if an event does happen, restoring that peace of mind really comes down to putting the right controls in place to prevent it from happening again.
Yes.
And then, there's a lot of PR things that have to happen too. So, engage the marketing team, engage a professional firm for that response, but making sure that you understand and aren't, overcommitting or doing something that just kind of hits the wrong way. You want to make sure that it's not tone deaf. You're talking about and addressing people's needs, taking it seriously. Those types of stuff are important. But how do you establish a more resilient environment to make sure these things happen again? Like, what sort of training things? Do you bring in external people? How do you identify that? And that's or what I think you could talk about here with that drill down.
Recommendations.
What we can do to fix it, right?
Yeah. I do want to touch, and we'll touch about the recommendations and what can we do about it. God knows I love speaking about what else we can do, right, in order to fix something. But I think what's special also about CRQ, and you just mentioned it, and it like popped into my head, is the fact that you're not alone with the risk anymore, right? It's not just you scared of what can possibly go wrong, but you have some kind of an ability, some kind of a language to talk to others that are not talking your very, very techy nerdy language, right? Or the security language. And now you're together in this. We're speaking, okay, this is our risk. This is what we are facing next year, right? Let's make those decisions later together about how we can face that if it will come. And about what we can do about it. So we at Kovrr utilize for the generation of the simulation for any kind of company with additional inputs, also the posture. CIS, NIST, ISO, whatever you guys are working, we get with for the modeling. And what it does, it basically adjusts how the company operates, and by that also adjusts how the world is riskier or less risky becomes to you. And once we know where you are, also what we can do is tell you, okay, what are the main steps that you can do in order to face that risk and to lower it and to mitigate. So if I know that I'm a company that around defined level with identity management, authentication, and access control, right? In that control. No, we've modeled that if I'll go one way up to manage, right? And we understand how to go to manage, my risk here on the 11 mil will go down in $300,000. And my big scary or the extreme loss, 1 to 100, 300 million, I'm sorry, can go down in another 11 million. What we do behind the scene is we create another run of a what if for all the events of all of the controls. Just think about the magnitude of data behind the scene. And then we isolate each one of the controls for each kind of an impact it can be. And of course, we offer you also to see that in a high level, in all of the different options and so on and so on and so on. Jack, did that answer your question?
Absolutely, yeah. This sort of risk buy down conversation, I think, is really important. How we determine which control categories we should spend money on, and you would need to align a specific security program to that reflects your organization. But categorically, I think we're definitely in the ballpark here of, hey, listen, we communicated here's how these bad things can happen. If you wanted to have less of a probability or less of an impact of having these worst case things, here's the top 3 or 4 or 5 control programs I would recommend we spend money on.
And we'll go back to that in the budgeting, but I think there's only one other thing that I will nail down here is about, everybody asks you, is it good or is it bad? I don't know. You give them an average of 37, you give them a PML or high likely loss of 200, 400 mil, and somebody in some kind of a room will ask you, well, and others, are they better than me or not that much, right? Like it always goes down to that. And us as human beings, we always compare ourselves to 2 different things. We compare ourselves to other people, and some of us also compare ourselves to ourselves, right? Did I did the best that I can? Yesterday I was better. Why did I? And in quantification in general, it's the same. It's the same concept. So we can start looking and understand how we perform based on our peers, locations, industry, right? Those that are similar to us. But what's cool about that in the Kovrr world is even a bit more complicated than that in a good way, because the world always brings us risk. The world is risky. It's inherent, right? And this is the baseline risk. This is where I start. I always have that risk in place. And then I'm trying my best and I'm putting my controls, and I'm somewhere between the worst case scenario worst case scenario that I can have to the best case scenario if I'll do everything right. But even if I'll do everything right, I might still be exposed. So I'm always that possibility of between my worst and my good. And this is what progressions allows you to show. It allows you at any point of time, let's say quarterly basis, just a recommendation, right? Run the model again and see what happens. Just as an example, right? We can see here as an example that ransomware in July, by the way, become less costly for this company. And we can start understanding why. By the way, what happened there was a model update. The world has become less riskier to me a bit, right? The controls were impacting better, and now I'm performing better than before. And this is a way for us to communicate how am I doing based on to my peers, the world in general. How am I performing to the best that I can based on what the world is bringing me, and how resilient the program that I have, right, based on those different changes throughout the journey of cyber world in general. So another use case.
So a couple questions that have come in that I think are relevant here. So, when we talk about that sort of comparison to peers there, the question is about, is the approach different for small or medium enterprises and different maturity and resource availability? how do we come up with that peer value, and
Mm,
why is it a reliable metric that we can benchmark people against?
okay. Long story short, peers
Yeah.
are companies in your industry and in your size and in your location. This is the long story short. We at Kovrr calls it the Crimson. Crimson, as we've started working with the insurance, by the way, it's the aggregate fashion of cyber risk. These are your peers. Let's take an example. Companies in Japan and in the US not necessarily will use the same vendors because maybe some of them are want to use, I don't know, local ones. Big companies versus small companies. Big companies now need CRMs, need like those big, gigantic, and small companies. I don't know, Google Drive, OneDrive. Maybe they'll manage their customers even in Excel to start with, right? And specific industries have specific vendors, have specific infrastructure that are most. So we cannot isolate each of them. But when we're looking at those three components together, now the signal becomes more close to who you are. So this is what we call peers. So every time, and it's a great question, every time that you'll see around here peers, you will understand that our companies in your size, location, and industry. And this is what they are likely to suffer, and this is how you're performing versus them. And even here, we can start seeing how my industry based different to different industries, and how my size and how companies bigger than me or smaller than me are more susceptible to specific cyber incidents and so on. Jack, that answer your
Yeah,
question?
that's perfect. Yeah, and I always think about this like the way that a credit rating agency would. We're sort of building a
Mm-hmm.
firmographic profile.
Yeah.
Another metaphor is sort of like if you're getting underwritten for car insurance. We're sort of taking this comparison of everybody who drives a certain type of car that has, a new driver, 16-year-old that just learned, how to drive, or somebody who's been driving for 40 or 50 years. We're sort of building that sort of profile that way. And then the specifics of your organization, those technographics, like what your tech stack looks like,
Yeah.
allow us to skew that up or down depending upon that. So that's how I think that comes into play. To that point, the assets that we're using to make these determinations, where does that come from? So how do we take that general firmographic view and then make it specific to those organizations that we're modeling using their particular assets?
So that's the Kovrr's magic, and I can even show you. So what you've just mentioned, we start from the basics, we start from the crimson, we start from you and your peers. And as you just mentioned, I use a specific technology in a specific area. Amazing. That technology has CVEs, maybe. What are their EPSS score, right? How does then my controls are implemented on that area of that technology? And those inputs make the model more bespoke from my baseline peers, we'll call it, right? To who am I? And this is where I guess the modeling magic happens, right? The bespokeness of the modeling. And every time, if we spoke about, by the way, progression, numbers can change because the world has changed, but also because I've changed. Let's now think about a situation where I have a decision in the company. You know what? It's the next slides. Jack, can I go and I'll show them
Yeah, go
something?
right ahead, please. Yeah.
Yeah, it's another conversation, right? This is the progression, as we said, about looking at me over time and also the benchmark. But it also relates to what we've just mentioned. So let's think about, I want to change, or I am changing. We can sit in a room and discuss what can be the next stuff, the next project, security projects, security products that we want to buy. And just an example, let's say we're have a company strategy that we're going cloud native. How exciting it is. Does it mean that all the risk has disappeared? Can it mean that it brings new risk to the table? So, hey, we can model now the company as if we're cloud-based, and now we can see how the risk has changed because I'm changing. And now the world can respond different to me. The numbers will change. But now what I can also do is to do another option and a what if, and to think about what or how will I look like if I'll even buy, now that I'm going cloud native, I need a cloud security platform, right? And right now I am postured in those levels. I'm just starting up because I didn't use cloud in continuous vulnerability management or in wireless. That's my posture as today. But if I will buy that cloud security profile platform, right, that will save me once I'll go cloud native, I'll be in higher level. And what's cool about that I can run the simulation twice and see the impact. So any kind of security solution, cybersecurity solution, any kind of security program, concept, initiative that even somebody says, oh, it will be cool if, what can be the impact on the business if, anything like that. Even business decisions, by the way. I want to operate in a different location. So many of them. I want to implement zero trust, anything like that. We can model twice and see what can be the impact from the financial aspect on the cyber risk. How much it will reduce the likelihood for me to suffer an event, how much it will reduce my average, how impact it will have on the tail, right? The extreme loss scenario. Will it downsize the damages that I was scared of, right? And brought to me at first. So this is but we just went that there, I think, I don't naturally, Jack, but another use case of ours to connect also the fact that we have recommendations already and we can definitely run the model again and again is to aggregate them and to also justify that specific tool again or a project based on the reduction that we give and the cost that you have on your side.
So
what do you think?
So this is, I think, a really important part of this. I've been a part of so many conversations where we are trying to make the argument, like on the prior side, like we want to get to a different level in our CIS maturity or in a CSF maturity or something. And that is sort of the beginning and the end of the argument. And I think this really shifts us a little bit to make a better, more business case for why we should do this type of thing. It's not just, hey, we need, a couple $1 million to do this thing for our cloud native security platform. It's we need this money, and oh, by the way, if you invest in this, we're going to reduce our average losses by about 2 million, and that worst case loss by almost 20 or 12 million, I guess. So I think that's an important conversation, and it answers some really basic questions around, why should I spend this money? I've said a lot. I sometimes don't like the term return on investment because nobody is getting cut a check because they have good security in place. But it is loss avoidance, which is almost the same thing, right? It's sort of, here's how much money I'm not going to spend later. And that's why you put, a fire extinguisher in the kitchen, for example. Like nobody's going to pay you because you have a fire extinguisher in the kitchen, but you will gain those benefits from lower premiums on your, fire insurance. And if, God forbid, something bad happens, you have the tools available to limit those losses that way. And I think that's really a different way of thinking about this and really coming to terms with that.
Completely. Thank you. So we talked about understanding my risk, right? As communication and reporting, we drilled into our ability also to talk about quarterly updates or my progression, or even how am I performing versus the peers, but also myself, because I can't do one without the other. And we talked about the fact that we can start understanding also what can I do about my losses. And we took as an example, not just control based or a specific event type, but also how we can utilize this platform to justify, as we said, a budget request of a project, a product, or anything such like. And the last piece will be, okay, not just what we can do in-house, but sometimes I need assistance from outside, and sometimes it might be even easier, right? It's always the fine line between understanding my risk, what can I do about it in terms of budget, what do I need to transfer outside to the insurance if I want, or even, let's say, capital allocation, even internally. And on top of that, now in the last couple of years, the materiality that is now comes strong as ever, and the conversations around tolerance and appetite that sometimes we could not have discussed because to a certain extent, nobody knew where they are on that range of loss or on that curve, right? So now we can come to those meetings and offer an insight. We don't say, believe that number 100%. No, but now let's have those conversations. Let's now see what are options, how do they look like, and let's decide on a view of risk together. And this is the last piece, the risk transfer. And just a quick one, and for those, maybe I don't know how many of you are loving insurance like I do. Second, by the way, to CRQ, is how does insurance policies are built. Let's talk about the easy ones, right? We have the premiums that are not written here, basically what I need to pay in order to be insured based on the statistic modeling, as Jack mentioned. I am that old, I'm driving this car, I have those incidents in the past, and so on and so on. And in cyber, they ask you have specific controls, do you have MFA? All of those questions that the insurance market says I can quantify them into some kind of risk that you bring within the underwriting process. By the way, our model served underwriting as well. And then they come up with a premium, but with the premium, they come up with a limit, how much they are willing to pay in the worst case scenario. Limits can be yearly and can be event-based. And that's where all the details comes into play. But it's not just how much they're willing to pay, it's how much you're going to pay before you'll see any kind of a dollar, right? Before they'll give you anything. And then also, of course, this is your participation and also some kind of a detachment point where they start paying starting the incident. And that's just the overall. But then it comes down into more. The fact, and this is something super important, apologies, the fact that for your different coverages within your insurance policy can have also those small limitations. I am willing for you as a company to have ransomware, and I'll pay you ransomware not more than $2 million. And when you'll have a business interruption, I'm starting to pay you from the 24 hours or the 48 hours, but hey, you're starting to lose money on the 8th. This is a waiting period. And what's interesting about what we do and the way we do it, and because of our ties with the insurance market, there are two things that you can start doing. You can start have those conversations about looking at the policy that you have in place or that you're being offered, and to model it on top of the platform, on top of the quantification that, by the way, this is how insurance do that 10,000 times of next year, right? This is basically how they quantify you and underwrite you. And you can have those conversations with them of saying, hey guys, you offer me that amount of limit, you leave me exposed here, or by the way, I'm so over the insured, right? And now let's see what I can cut down. Should I cut down maybe on a specific coverage, as we said? Maybe I have a specific, here is an example, right? I know my coverages on data breach might be a bit higher, but should I have coverages around, I don't know, BI that high? Maybe I can lower that cost for them and to expand on others. The optimization is important. So this is the option, to utilize whatever you have in your hand today to start understanding where you're more vulnerable and where you can save money. It's always nice to save money, but also to see, drill into, we go back here, the impact scenarios that are basically built by the coverages of insurance also. So we can start saying, okay, business interruption is 10 mil. Okay, for 10 mil, let's look. They have different probabilities to suffer different losses. I am for business interruption, forensics, recovery, loss of income, and PR. What do you have under your policy? What are you insuring me for? How much of loss of income? And by the way, if you'll click here on the export, you'll see exactly the amount of dollars for the loss of income here. So it's really in-depth looking at insurance. And what you're able to do then, when we started, and then I'll stop basically, right? I started by understanding my risk. That's the number one. It's the most important one. I am starting to understand my risk. I'm starting to communicate in the language that the business understands. I understand where those losses are coming from. I explain how do I perform over time based on others, but also myself. I can now speak in the language of what can I do about it, and to ask for explained, right? To explain the use of my budget and how effective is going to be in reducing my risk, but also to start looking at my transfer strategies and to understand where there I can optimize. And in overall, now we can speak the business language, right? And do those hard decisions together. Jack, any thoughts, any questions, maybe something from the
great.
crowd?
And I was thinking about this as you were going over the risk transfer features, and you mentioned we've done this risk accumulation modeling for Aon and MapFree and Allianz, and some people will say, well, I'm getting that same kind of modeling from my broker, so why do I need to get it from a third party? Why is that helpful?
Insurance in general can be multi models. It can be one model. And I think the option for you to do it yourself and to have those insightful conversations, right? And to be part of the decision process and not just to say, okay, I believe you, will serve better the insurance market and you. It will bring to a better optimization of the capital allocation, right? And by the way, premiums are crazy high at the moment, crazy high. And now we hear more about companies saying, okay, do we need insurance? Jeff, have you heard that? Can I self-insure myself?
Good investment.
Exactly. It becomes so expensive. So I'm not saying don't buy insurance. I'm not saying buy insurance. I'm saying check, look at your insurance, drill into these policies, because eventually you'll find the solution, maybe to have even both. But right now, I feel like you don't necessarily have the power with the modeling itself to even be in those conversations. And that's about that. It's to empower you in those conversations. Jack, what's your take on that?
I always say, and I'm a little bit more, I always joke about this a little bit. I think the incentives are misaligned. If we gave you a report that said, here's
Profit.
all the additional benefits of having CRQ and you should buy more CRQ, you'd be like, well, obviously you're going to tell me to buy more CRQ. This is the business that you're in. I think there's certainly ethics in the insurance business. I'm not saying that, but I think that it's valuable to have an outsider's perspective on it, to sort of check against that. And you said multi-model type of approach, and that's something you get in very sophisticated insurers, where they'll buy multiple models and they'll compare them and sort of look at them that way. We found clients that have been grossly overinsured, that if they had if their underwriters had really held themselves to higher ethical standards, they would not have insured at this amount, and they've as a result saved millions of dollars annually in premiums that way. And conversely, that were very underinsured, that didn't realize the amount of loss they actually have, and we're happy to buy that. So I think as you start to move into more commoditization of the cyber insurance business, you get less custom consulting and views this way. And it's very valuable to make sure you have an independent model that is accurately depicting loss. And oh, by the way, brings those same actuarial grade insurance functions, to your enterprise risk management functions for cybersecurity. And you don't even need to be a sophisticated enterprise risk management firm at enterprise risk management function at a financial services firm to do this. because we sort of automated all that stuff behind the
Yeah.
scenes. Now you can have the same benefits of that to kind of put these things together. Actually, we had a question about this that I missed
Please.
earlier, but that was sort of the idea, was around, this is normally the kind of thing you would see at a financial services company. How do smaller non-financials do this? And it's basically the same way. You can write insurance for any organization. You have to sort of just figure out what their version of how many drivers do you have, how many cars do you have, what's your liability on those cars, what's your driving record. We're kind of doing the same thing, but for cyber that way. So that sort of democratization of those
Yeah.
cyber insurance models through something like a Kovrr CRQ platform allows you to kind of get those things. Okay, a couple other questions
Yeah.
here.
Let's go.
Before we wrap up today, we have some questions around third-party risk verification. We don't have this in our slide deck today, but we do. I can answer this one. We do actually
Yeah.
reach out to the modeled company. So and part of the firmographic data sets that we're managing, we get things like URLs. And through those URLs, we're deriving DNS services, and we're sort of querying those to figure out if there's pointer records to cloud service providers. Our earlier question around assets, we can go behind the firewall through APIs and gather data that way around different tech stacks. We're trying to sort of, and then we sort of present this list of here's the technologies that we auto-discovered this way. And you can modify that, you can add to it if we miss something, or you can delete them. But it sort of provides us a good foundation with which to start those types of modeling that way. Yeah, and our third-party stuff works that way as well. Great. Well, we've kind of come to the end of our time today. I don't know if there's any additional questions anybody has, but we should mention once again, we do these sessions monthly, these sort of office hours with me and or other people from the team, where we talk about CRQ generally. We kind of go through use cases. It's an educational session. We expose you a little bit to the tool, but also more importantly, how to leverage those things to solve business problems that way. We'll reach out to you, Delora, about your question about transcripts and stuff. So we'll get you some connection there. And the point is to really sort of serve as an educational function, outside of a sales function, to really sort of get you familiar with how to do these things and what to do with them, and how to really solve your problems that way. So I'm very grateful that Or has joined today. Thank you for putting together this great slide deck and talking us through some of the use cases. You talk to a lot of our clients all day, every day. You do a lot of custom stuff for them as well. So you really get to get deep inside their organizations and understand their sort of business problems, and really sort of understand, what they're trying to solve. And that's reflected here, as well as on our platform as well. So, we spend a lot of time talking to our clients, gathering feedback around what they're using it for, how they're using it. We just actually added ISO modeling. We have NIST CSF, we have CAS, and we have ISO modeling in there for control recommendations based directly on some client requests that we've had recently. And we got more in the pipeline too. So be sure to check back with us on that. And good. So reach out to me if you have any questions, or us at that generic email address I mentioned. We're doing some custom consulting with some clients. We're giving folks, a couple free sessions with me where we're modeling different sort of use cases. The one we're sort of focusing on is that materiality / appetite piece there, where we're really looking at, what the sort of building a one-page slide to help organizations better select what that looks like. It's based on some experience that I've had doing this at a couple different firms, as well as our materiality feature that we put into the tool, where we auto suggest some of those thresholds as well. So thank you all for joining. We'll talk again next month. Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Take care, everybody.